The moment the doors slid open, the entire observation chamber fell silent. Doctor. Xyrek had witnessed over 100 species step through those very doors, each one a nervous wreck, their bodies trembling under the weight of what was about to unfold. He had seen warrior races hesitate, brilliant minds falter, apex predators reduced to nothing more than whimpering shadows of themselves. The Galactic Trials were designed for one purpose: to break any species that dared call itself strong. Yet, as the two humans stepped into the chamber, they were smiling. Jackson Knox strolled forward like a man stepping onto the set of his favorite action movie, his boots tapping against the polished obsidian floor with a casual rhythm. His posture was relaxed, his hands shoved into the pockets of a flight jacket worn and scuffed from use. Next to him, Ezra Vasquez moved with the same quiet precision as a soldier scanning for dangers, calm, controlled, but unmistakably ready. Neither of them hesitated. Neither of them even blinked at the towering presence of the Galactic High Council watching from the observation deck. Jax grinned as he took in the testing chamber, his sharp green eyes lighting up like a kid on Christmas morning. This place looks awesome. Doctor. Xyrek's secondary hearts missed a beat. No one had ever called the trials awesome. The chamber was engineered to trigger the deepest, most primal fears of any species that entered it: variable gravity fluctuations, atmospheric instability, and terrain that shifted from solid ground to chasms in the blink of an eye. It was a gauntlet of pure, calculated terror. The humans weren't supposed to look excited. Ezra gave Jax a side-eye glare, exhaling through her nose. Maybe keep the enthusiasm in check. Knox, let's not scare the scientists just yet. Jax smirked. Oh, come on. We haven't even seen the hard part. Doctor. Xyrek flicked his mandibles together sharply, trying to regain control of the situation. He cleared his throat, his voice echoing through the chamber's intercom. Representatives Knox and Vasquez, you have been selected as the first of your species to undergo the Galactic Trials. This is not a game. It is a scientifically rigorous evaluation of your ability to withstand extreme conditions. And he let that hang in the air, waiting for the weight of his words to settle. Do you understand the gravity of this situation? Jax tilted his head slightly. You mean metaphorically or literally? Because I think your gravity's a little light in here. You mind cranking it up a bit? A murmur of horrified confusion spread through the observation deck. Xyrek's translator glitched. That had to be an error. No species had ever requested an increase in gravity. Ezra sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. He means it's too easy. Xyrek's exoskeleton dimmed in shock. The last species that faced the trials had lost under half the starting conditions. Noted, he said stiffly. We will begin at standard parameters. You may attempt to survive as best you can. Jax rolled his shoulders, grinning at Ezra. All right, let's see what they've got. The observation chamber's containment field hummed to life. The trials had begun. Doctor. Xyrek had a sinking feeling that the galaxy was about to witness something unprecedented. The chamber lurched. The floor trembled beneath their feet as the artificial gravity field shifted, testing the limits of biological equilibrium. For most species, this was where the fear set in. The sudden loss of stability, the eerie sensation of weight pulling in unnatural directions. It was enough to send even the hardiest warriors spiraling into panic. Jax Knox grinned, whoa, adjusting his stance as the gravity flux dragged his body toward the left. He bent his knees, rolling with the shift like a surfer catching a wave. This is trippy as hell. Ezra Vasquez remained steady, only shifting her center of balance slightly, her expression unreadable. Keep your footing, Knox. No face planting in front of the aliens. Jax wobbled dramatically before righting himself, flashing her a cocky smirk. Wouldn't dream of it. From the observation deck, Doctor. Xyrek's mandibles clicked in alarm. The first phase had only just begun. Gravity shifts were meant to disorient, to invoke the primal terror of losing control. He had expected stumbling, panicked breathing, signs of distress. Instead, the humans were adjusting in real time, as if their bodies had been built for unpredictability. Increase the fluctuation rate, Xyrek ordered. The scientists hesitated. Now. The chamber responded instantly. Gravity intensified, then vanished altogether for a fraction of a second before slamming back down at twice the force. Jax kicked off the ground with perfect timing, flipping through the air, laughing. He twisted midair, using the next gravity shift to launch himself into a handspring, then landed lightly on his feet, like he'd just stuck a gymnastics routine. Ezra, meanwhile, had simply adjusted before impact, her body responding instinctively, absorbing each shift with effortless control. The observation deck had gone completely silent. "By the void," one scientist whispered, their bioluminescent skin dimming in shock. "They think this is fun." "Doctor." Xyrek felt something unsettling curl in his chest. "No, that cannot be." Jax clapped his hands together. "All right, that was a solid warm-up. What's next?" Xyrek signaled for the second phase immediately. He couldn't allow them to keep making of the trials. The room's temperature plummeted. The oxygen levels thinned. The once solid ground beneath their feet fractured into jagged terrain, forcing them into a hostile, unpredictable battlefield. These were conditions designed to challenge the mind. Jax took a deep breath, exhaled, and grinned. "Ah, this feels like Denver in January." Ezra glanced around, assessing the environment with the sharp efficiency of a soldier. "Oxygen's thin, but manageable. Watch your step, unstable terrain." "Got it." Jax nodded. "Oh, by the way, bet I can reach the other side first." Ezra barely spared him a glance. "Bet you can't." Jax took off at a sprint. The terrain was meant to slow them down, meant to force caution, but humans weren't built for caution. They were built for adapting. The fractured ground buckled under Jax's weight, but instead of hesitating, he launched himself forward, leaping from unstable rock to unstable rock like he was born for this. Ezra matched his pace effortlessly, moving like a shadow beside him. Behind the observation glass, "This is not possible," Xyrek muttered, gripping the railing so tightly his claws dented the metal. "No species should be able to move like that under these conditions." The chief data analyst swallowed hard. "Sir, they're getting faster." Jax landed in a crouch on the other side of the chamber, barely winded, turning to Ezra with a smug grin. "Told you." She smacked him on the shoulder as she passed. "You still lost by 2 seconds. From the observation deck, one scientist slowly raised a trembling hand. "Sir, at what point do we stop the test?" Xyrek's throat felt dry. "I do not know." The chamber rumbled. The final phase was activating. Jax cracked his knuckles, rolling his shoulders. His smile hadn't faded. If anything, it had only grown. "All right," he murmured under his breath, eyes gleaming with something wild, something unstoppable. "Let's see what you've really got." The chamber's hum deepened, a low, guttural vibration that resonated through the air like the warning growl of a predator. Lights flickered. The walls shifted. The ground beneath Jax and Ezra split apart, revealing a cavernous drop into what looked like a void of absolute darkness. A harsh, artificial wind howled through the room, and the temperature gauge plummeted below freezing. From the observation deck, "Doctor." Xyrek's claws twitched. This was Phase 3. The moment where the contestants realized they were out of their depth, panic settled in and fight or flight took over. But the humans, they didn't panic. Jax whistled, stepping dangerously close to the edge, peering down into the abyss like a child inspecting a new toy. "That's a hell of a drop." Ezra crouched, testing the crumbling ground with her fingertips, her breath misting in the freezing air. Winds pulling inward, probably a gravity well. She scanned the chamber, her sharp gaze locking onto a single, swinging platform dangling above the abyss. "Looks like that's our way across." Jax grinned. "Oh, this is going to be fun." Xyrek's exoskeleton flashed a pale shade of distress. That platform was deliberately placed at an impossible angle, designed to require calculated precision. No species had ever managed to reach it before their bodies succumbed to exhaustion, disorientation, or sheer terror. The humans should be panicking. The moment he leaped off the ledge, the wind shifted violently, but instead of fighting it, he rolled midair, adjusting his momentum, and grabbed onto the platform's edge with one hand. His body swung dangerously over nothingness. A collective gasp rippled through the observation deck. Jax laughed. "Just like bouldering in high winds." From the ledge, Ezra's expression didn't change. "You gonna hang there all day or what?" Jax pulled himself up with an absurd amount of ease, then turned, planting his feet on the platform. He spread his arms dramatically. "Your turn, Vasquez." Ezra didn't hesitate. She backed up a few steps, adjusted her breathing, then launched herself forward. The wind shrieked against her body, trying to hurl her off course, but her form was flawless, controlled, precise. She snatched Jax's outstretched hand at the last possible second. using his momentum to swing herself up beside him in one fluid motion. Xyrek gripped the railing so hard it fractured beneath his claws. Impossible, one scientist whispered, their bioluminescent skin dimming in shock. Xyrek forced his voice to remain steady. Activate the cognitive fight, now. The moment the words left his mouth, the air around Jax and Ezra shifted. The chamber's walls melted away, and suddenly, they weren't standing on the platform anymore. The room had transformed. Jax blinked. A second ago, he'd been standing on an unstable ledge over a death pit, and now he was home. The crisp, familiar scent of pine trees filled his lungs. The towering mountains of his childhood loomed before him, dusted with snow. The wind carried echoes of laughter, his father's voice, his mother calling him in for dinner. Ezra staggered, her pulse spiking. She was no longer in the chamber. She was back in the desert. Years ago, when she was 16, her younger brother, Marco, was screaming for her. She could hear her own breath, rapid and uneven. From the observation deck, Xyrek watched the screens with razor-sharp focus. The cognitive assault simulation was their strongest psychological weapon. It bypassed logic, pulling them into their most traumatic memories, forcing them to relive the moments that had shaped their deepest fears. Ezra's pulse pounded against. Her hands ached with the memory of trying to claw Marco free. She had been so young, so helpless, trapped in a moment she had no power to change. She could feel the heat, and then she heard Jax's voice. Hey. Ezra's head snapped up. Her vision flickered. It was wrong. She was not 16. Marco was not here. This wasn't real. Jax's voice pulled her back. They're messing with our heads, he said, his voice grounded, steady, unshaken. It's not real, Vasquez. She forced herself to breathe. The air still tasted of heat and smoke, but now she knew. It was a lie. Jax turned toward his own illusion, his childhood home, his parents' laughter echoing in the distance. Safe. A place he would give anything to go back to. But it wasn't real. His jaw tightened. Nice try, aliens, he muttered. Then, without hesitation, he walked straight through the illusion. The second his foot hit the ground, the simulation shattered. The observation deck erupted into chaos. They broke it, a scientist gasped, staring at the failing data stream. They resisted a full-scale cognitive override. Xyrek's mandibles twitched violently. That wasn't possible. He turned back to the chamber just in time to see Jax and Ezra still standing. The humans had passed the point where every other species had failed. Jax was smiling. Ezra exhaled, rubbing a hand down her face. That was some serious nightmare fuel. You good? Jax flexed his hands, rolling his shoulders. I've had worse. Xyrek's exoskeleton pulsed with anxiety. The humans were moving into Phase 4, the final stage, and he had no idea how to stop them. The final phase had begun. Jax barely had time to register the shift before the ground exploded beneath them. Alarms screamed. The wind howled, shrieking through widening cracks in the walls as the artificial atmosphere destabilized. From the observation deck, Dr. Xyrek's claws dug into the railing. This was it. The ultimate survival test, a simulated event designed to force absolute hopelessness. The humans had defied every expectation, but no species, had ever endured this. Ezra hit the ground hard, rolling with the impact. The chamber's temperature plummeted past survivable limits. Jax landed beside her, coughing against the sudden atmospheric shift. His vision blurred for half a second before snapping back into focus. The chamber was coming apart. And with it, every rule of survival had just changed. Xyrek's voice crackled over the failing intercom. You have 60 seconds, this environmental. Jax wiped blood from a cut on his brow, then grinned through it. Oh, come on. You could at least make it challenging. Ezra shot him a look somewhere between frustration and disbelief. Knox, now is not the time. He threw his hands up, eyes glinting with something wild. When's a better time? The platform beneath them groaned as another section of the chamber detached. The gravity field fluctuated violently, sending debris spiraling upward in defiance of physics. Then, without warning, Ezra was gone. Jax's stomach dropped as she vanished through a section of the floor. His breath hitched. His body moved before his brain could process it. He lunged. Fingers brushed metal. His grip locked onto her wrist just. Her weight jerked him forward, nearly pulling him down with her. His boots slid dangerously close to the edge, the ground beneath him barely holding under the force. Ezra didn't scream. She just looked at him, her dark eyes sharp, calculating. She knew exactly what this meant. "Jax," she said evenly, voice tight. "Let me go." His jaw clenched. "I will not do." Her fingers gripped his arm hard enough to bruise. "Listen to me. The terrain is unstable. You won't be able to pull us both back up." The structure gave another shudder, tilting dangerously toward collapse. Jax felt his footing disintegrating, but he didn't care. "I said," he gritted his teeth, "I will not do." Then, with a growl of sheer stubborn defiance, he planted his weight and hauled her up in one brutal motion. Ezra gasped as her body cleared the ledge. They landed hard, breathless. The simulation raged on, but for a moment there was only the sharp inhale of oxygen, the thundering of their heartbeats, the reality of how close it had been. Jax exhaled, voice hoarse. "Yeah, not happening." Ezra stared at him, something unreadable flickering behind her eyes. Then she shoved his shoulder hard. "You reckless," her voice cracked. She turned away for half a second, pulling herself together. When she faced him again, her glare was as sharp as ever. "Don't do that again." Jax grinned, rubbing his sore arm. "No promises." The chamber shook violently, snapping them back to reality. The final fail-safe alarms began blaring, signaling the last 60 seconds. The artificial sky above them fractured, revealing the raw, pulsing energy of the containment FIDE. Xyrek's voice rang out, tight with something eerily close to desperation. 30 seconds to failure. Evacuate immediately." Ezra's breath steadied, her mind clicking back into focus. Exit. Across the rapidly disintegrating landscape, a single door remained intact, flickering in and out of the unstable field. "Gotta jump." Ezra squinted. The gap was too far. Even with their best effort, the wind shear alone would throw them off course. Jax turned to her with that same feral, reckless grin. "Trust me?" She exhaled. "Always." Then they ran. Xyrek could only watch, horrified. As the two humans charged toward, the gravity field flickering dangerously, Jax launched himself forward without hesitation, grabbing onto Ezra at the last second, using their combined weight to adjust midair, angling just right. The containment field erupted. Then the emergency exit burst open. Two human figures stumbled out, covered in dust and grinning. Jax turned to Ezra, breathless. "Told you we'd make it." Ezra just nodded her head, wiping sweat from her brow. Xyrek's secondary heart finally restarted. His mandibles clicked furiously, trying and failing to comprehend what had just happened. Jax and Ezra had survived. They had won. Jax and Ezra stood just beyond the threshold of the chamber, their bodies covered in dust and sweat. The glow of emergency lights cast long shadows behind them, survivors of something no one was meant to survive. "Doctor." Xyrek could not move. His mind, sharpened by decades of scientific study, could not compute what his eyes were seeing. Two humans walked out laughing. Some scientists were staring at their data pads as if the numbers themselves had to be wrong. Others simply gawked, unable to fully process that these two creatures had not only endured the impossible, but seemed to have enjoyed it. Xyrek's throat was dry. His exoskeleton pulsed in shifting shades of disbelief. "This is unprecedented." Ezra rolled her shoulders, wincing slightly. "So that means we passed, right?" The words sent an immediate ripple of chaos through the observation deck. A dozen voices spoke at once, scientists debating, arguing, trying to make sense of the shattered test parameters. Their evaluation systems were not built to process results beyond the scale of measurement. Xyrek barely heard any of it. His mind was reeling, caught in the weight of what he had just witnessed. He had expected failure, or at the very least struggle. But these two hadn't just survived the trials. They had defied them. They had rewritten them. Jax turned his grin toward the observation deck, shielding his eyes from the glare of the overhead lights. "Hey, so what's next? Do we get some kind of trophy? A handshake? Maybe a welcome to the Galactic Confederation fruit basket?" Xyrek stared. The overhead speakers cracked to life, cutting him off. A new voice, low and commanding, filled the chamber. It belonged to Chancellor Orven, the highest-ranking member of the Galactic Confederation. "Enough!" The entire room fell silent. Even Jax straightened, sensing that, for the first time, the weight of the moment had finally settled. A new window opened on the observation deck, revealing the Chancellor's imposing form. His deep-set eyes burned with intensity, his expression unreadable. He regarded the humans for a long, tense moment before speaking again.
No species has ever completed the trials at this level.
His voice carried through the chamber like a storm. What you have done here today has shattered our understanding of sentient endurance. Jax exchanged a quick glance with Ezra before responding.
Thank you.
Orven did not react. The trials were designed to determine the limits of a species, to find the breaking point. His gaze sharpened. You did it. Jax smirked, shifting his weight slightly. Yeah, well, we're kind of stubborn like that. Ezra shot him a glare, but Orven did not look amused. Xyrek, still recovering, took a hesitant step forward. Chancellor, he began carefully, his voice the hesitation in his thoughts. What do we do with them? Orven did not respond immediately. Instead, his gaze remained locked on the humans, studying them in a way that made even Jax shift slightly. Then, slowly, he exhaled. We welcome them. The words rippled through the room like a physical force. Xyrek's mandibles clicked in protest. But sir, the protocol. The protocol is obsolete, Orven said, voice firm. We created these trials to measure survival. His gaze darkened. But we failed to account for a species that does not simply survive. Jax lifted a brow. So, that's a yes on the fruit basket? Orven's eyes narrowed. Jax wheezed, doubling over slightly. All right. I'll shut up. Orven turned toward Xyrek. Prepare the official declaration. Humanity is to be granted immediate entry into the Confederation,